The content discussed on this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be construed as financial or mortgage advice. Always consult with a licensed professional before making any decisions regarding mortgages or financial matters.
Welcome to the Canadian Mortgage Show. Here are mortgage professionals Alex Pang and Alex Shanks to cut through the BS and educate Canadians on all things mortgages and real estate.
Welcome to episode 2 of the Canadian Mortgage Show. I'm your host, Alex Pang, along with my co-host, Alex Shanks. Still locked in the shed in the basement somewhere.
Out on someday. My wife and my kids will maybe let me come out of here at some point.
If you're listening, please send food. Please send help for Alex. How you doing, buddy?
Pretty good. Send me a microphone. We know that last episode, it was, the listeners aren't going to know, but the microphone cut in and out. I'm going to be getting a new one here soon.
Yes, and the beauty of Amazon, we should be getting it tomorrow, so it will improve, folks. We got the ship running,
Yep.
But it's going. So we have a jam-packed show today. Like today, you know what? We have a lot to talk about. First, BC has limited the increase for rent to 3% for next year. They did say that they wanted to tie it to inflation. Well, it's lower than this year at 3.5%. I have a little issue with that because inflation during COVID was 8 or 9%. Did they allow us landlords to increase rent by 8 or 9%? No, we had to be frozen for that time. So it is what it is. What do you think, Alex?
Well, I mean, we got some big news of, well, some people, one person at the moment, they may have got a 23.5% increase on their landlord actual. And that's, I mean, it could set precedent. We don't know, like, if this is one landlord that's gotten, what about all the other ones? And like, let's talk about how they got this increase.
They applied to the rental tenancy board in BC, and they were able to prove that their expenses far exceeded like what the rent would allow them to, and be profitable or even be able to sustain the building. And you know, it's 25% of, like, I'm pretty sure they have a variable rate, which, you know, easily could show that the costs have skyrocketed. But 25% of mortgage holders in BC are on variable. So like, as you said earlier, Alex, that sets a precedent. Now, are we going to see a ton of cases now at the tribunal asking for more than the 3% rent increase? I don't know.
What's your take on it? I'll tell you this. I know that renters and landlords, like landlords have been kind of shafted. They need to be able to increase it. But like when you buy an asset, like it is a risky investment. Like you shouldn't, it's not a guaranteed return. If I went and bought a stock, I'm not guaranteed to get a 23% return.
Right.
And so in this case, like I understand it. To me, it is a scary precedent to set. I would say there could be some pretty bad feedback from renters.
Yeah, first saw it, I'm like, you guys just opened a can of worms, because it's not like everyone's going to do it, but it does open the door for other people to do it. So a case in point, I mean,
Yeah.
we're landlords ourselves. I'd like to think we're not slumlords. We treat our tenants, fairly, treat them well and everything. But the rent, they've been with us, like one renter has been with us for 9 years. Love him. He's great.
Yeah.
But he got in when the rent was whatever it was. And over the course of 9 years, even with 2 or 3% increases and a freeze during COVID, his rent is only about like $200 more than it was when he first moved in 9 years. Well, guess what market rent is today for that same place? It's double, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, there's some unscrupulous landlords that use the rent eviction, right, loophole, or I'm going to move in and my families are going to move in, and the whole, for 6 months, eat the loss and rent it back out at market rates. And that's why BC is closing that loophole and stretched that out to 1 year.
Say that I mean, they almost messed up real bad there on the mortgage side of saying like, hey, you have to give 4 months notice. Luckily, they are going to curtail that back to 3 months. If you're buying a home that's being rented and you're going to live in it, it's still going to be the 4 months. If it's for a family member, But I mean the government did not think about those rules. The rent evictions, like, that needs to stop. That, like, it shouldn't even be a question. You have to show that the place really needs work to be able to kick someone out. Where I know some people were saying, "Oh, I got to redo the floors," and they were able to get them kicked out.
Yeah, it's a tough situation. I mean, BC and Ontario, we are a rent controlled province. Now, Alberta doesn't have rent control. I'm like, how do they do it? I know, like, think, Alberta's the Texas or Florida of Canada, and they're different politically and all that stuff. But it got me thinking, like, we've had rent control for quite some time, but it's not working, right? The whole idea
Yeah.
behind rent control is to improve housing affordability. And we've had rent control for 30 years and it's done the exact opposite. So, this is obviously going to be controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway. This is a question is, should we get rid of rent control in BC and Ontario? What do you think?
I think we need to bring in a hybrid of how commercial rentals are done. In a commercial renter, you get to increase by the cost. You get to give that back to your person. But at the same time, you also are meant to give back when costs go down as well, in
Mm-hmm.
some cases. That's honestly, I feel like there should be a better give and take. But it's, again, like, you can't try and increase by 26% on someone.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's yeah, I don't really know. Obviously, like, we know COVID rents were lower, they skyrocketed. How would we control that if it ever happened again without some sort of rent control? And that's where I think there needs to be something, but we know what we're doing right now isn't working.
It isn't working. I remember I was looking back, there used to be a allowable rent increase plus inflation. And up until
Yeah.
maybe, I believe it's 2017 or something like that, that BC just removed that extra bump and just made it to inflation. And as we know, inflation has run rampant, especially during COVID. Now, under the current system, I just want to, like, just to summarize what's going on, like, our current system, a little bit on the socialist side, because we have rent controls, supply is suppressed because owners are limited to what they can increase. At the same time, their cost has risen, right? Just like any business. I know, like, I hate it. Like, I'm sure people hate it to think that housing is a business, but a lot of people use housing as an investment, right? And an investment is essentially a business. And just like if you think of McDonald's, if minimum wage goes up, you pretty much know your Big Mac is going to go up, right?
It's
The owner
going.
passed
Yeah.
the cost on to the consumer, and we all know that, right?
Yeah.
Minimum wage now is $17.40. What that does it improve the workers' affordability? It may sound good on their paycheck, but all of a
Yeah.
sudden, your meal is $15-20, right?
I'll
It's
tell you this,
no.
Alex. I was at McDonald's. I was getting a coffee today, and I was showing my son my first apartment that I rented was $600.
Hmm.
That's what my first apartment was. That same thing rents out for $1,800 now. That's like that's mind blowing. And
Yeah.
we say inflation, that we can say inflation's at 5%. It's definitely, I haven't lived in that in a long time, but I'll tell you, it's a lot more than 5% on an annual
Hmm.
basis.
Well, I mean, relatively, when you rented that apartment for 600, what was minimum wage back then? It was what, $6 an hour or something like that?
Uh, Maybe like 9 or 10, I think.
Right, right, right. Well, I
Uh,
mean, under the current system, I'm just looking back on history. A lot of owners have, because the province, like us and Ontario, are more like totally slanted towards the tenant's favor. That some owners are just choosing not to rent out their space because they just don't want to
yep.
deal with it, right? They don't want to deal with like such restrictive policies. So what that does is it suppresses supply, and we know from economics, if you have less supply, that means rents go up, right?
Yep. And home prices too. It's the one thing talking about that not renting. A lot of people do claim a lot of negative, like, rent on their taxes right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm starting to see more chatter of, like, CRA is cracking down on that. They want to know, like, well, why is your rent so negative? If you have a good reason to it, of like, hey, my variable rate mortgage and stuff, but the people that are claiming these interests, like, with no renters in it, CRA might come back to you and say, you can't claim this negative anymore. Like, you're not trying to rent it out. You're just claiming negative, like, interest on it.
Yeah, that's on a separate note. It seems CRA is starve for tax dollars. Our government has gotten
Yeah,
bloated. I mean, this is going off on a different topic, but there's a stat out there that 1 in 4 people who are employed in Canada work for some level of government, whether it be federal, provincial, municipal. I'm like, that's astounding, right? But because of the restrictive policies, I'm just calling it as it is. Many like owners have actually forced to not rent it out to like a long-term renter. They forced to, use it as Airbnb, right? We've seen the rise of Airbnb because people are trying to make up the shortfall because of rent control, right? And
that's
right.
yeah, and but I mean, it's still like it is. I still know it's still out there. But what is the cost of a hotel downtown Vancouver? That has risen as soon as they brought that in.
Well,
It
yeah,
is it has helped no one.
it's the whole supply and demand issue, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
I mean, they decided to choose their residents over tourism, and
yeah.
now trying to like they got rid of Airbnb altogether, and there's in
Tourists.
Kelowna, and you're
Yeah.
looking at like on any like long weekend, you're looking at like $700-800 a night for
And
Kelowna.
that's for
I'm like,
like a basic hotel, not
yeah,
like, and I think their tourism was down like 55% or something.
exactly. And I'm
Um,
like, it
and
doesn't.
I mean, we can see rent. I know it's increased the prices on Ontario. There has started to see a dip. Like rent is actually going down. The first time since COVID. It hasn't worked in BC. Rent is only going up still.
Yeah,
So banning these
yeah,
Airbnb, it hasn't done anything.
yeah, it's the fact that landlords are scared because you hear all this horror stories of like, yes, you do hear horror stories of slumlords and stuff, but on the other
Oh,
end, you hear a lot of professional tenant stories,
yeah,
right? Where
yeah,
tenants
yeah,
abuse the system. They know that there's a
yeah,
backlog on tribunals, on evictions. In the meantime, they get to live rent free or not
yeah,
pay anything. And then oftentimes you hear the saying cash for keys, right? Like where landlords
yeah.
are offering 10, 20 grand or whatever amount just to kick out the renter, just to cut your losses and get the F out kind of thing, right? And
I had clients that were trying to sell and buy, and when that new law came in with the 4 months, they were offering people money. Like, can
yeah,
you get out? Because they knew if they didn't, no one's going to want to come buy their house because
yep.
now that person has to wait 4 months. What about their rental? Like, it's a cycle that has not been fixed, and it's what we're doing. And so, tell me about a place that has actually changed something. That's actually
Yes.
done something.
Yeah. Doing some research beforehand, and there have been numerous studies worldwide about rent control, and they have all concluded that it's a bad idea. So like it actually does the exact opposite of its intended purpose, right? The idea of governments in rent control is to protect the renter, right, from rent going crazy. But what it has done is actually done the opposite. And so one, I just want to show it's like a textbook example of removing rent control and what it did. Argentina, the president Javier Milei, he's a libertarian. He removed rent control in December of 2023. The result of it, housing supply went up 212%.
That's insane.
Rents,
That's an
that's
insane
insane,
stat.
right? And we can dissect that in a second. Rents are down 26%. That doesn't, it's
That's
like mind blowing. Like
yeah.
what? And
That's
mortgage costs are down 30%. So let's dive into that. Why is housing supply up 200%? Because you remove rent control. Well, I mean, if you make it a little more attractive for people to invest in real estate, then yes, more people. Yes, greed comes in and people want to, buy in kind of thing. At this point in time in like Canada, BC, other than Calgary, it's not that attractive to buy an investment property. It's just what it is, right?
yeah, I mean, people are buying pre-construction hoping for appreciation. That
Yeah.
is like
That's a hope
the
and a prayer, and
eh,
that's speculation.
which
But
which I don't mind. Well, sorry, Alex. I'll talk one thing about like the investing for real estate is the one thing I do like is it's back to like you actually have to put work in. You have to find the right property. You either have to do work to it. That
mhm.
thing I do think that's a good thing finally. Like it's not I just bought this house and a year later I sold it for 200K.
Oh
Like
yeah,
that's not real estate investing. That
that's
that was
speculation.
gambling.
That was speculating, and a lot of people
Yeah.
jumped in, and it. I guess it worked for 10, 15 years
Yeah.
until the clock struck midnight and rates shot up to the
Yeah.
moon, right? In the last 18, 24 months, and people were caught, right?
Yeah.
But
It's dealing with people that. But yeah, let's tell me about the
yeah,
rent there
okay.
in
So in
Argentina.
this scenario, just because you remove rent control, yes, more people are investing. So that created more supply in the marketplace. And when there's more supply, then as a landlord, if you're trying to compete with Tom, Mary, and Joe down the street with the same apartment, rents slowly came
Gotta
down.
bring.
It
Yeah.
came down.
So on the housing side, was did more developers come in because that they knew investors would come? Obviously, right now we're contracting because investors in BC and Ontario do not want to buy pre-construction. The
Yeah.
cost of it's too high. So like,
Yeah.
what did they do that way to increase the like that? I just don't even know.
Yeah. So what essentially happened was just more mom and pops, like, just everyday people
Yeah,
and I started
so,
renting out the space
yeah,
that we would have kept on our own. And just
yeah.
that alone, that will beat any construction build, right? Just by
Yeah.
making it more attractive for any regular homeowner to use their basement suite to rent out.
Ah,
That's what increased supply
ah,
200%. Right
okay.
now,
There we
because of
go.
rent control, not attractive
There's someone,
anymore.
yeah, yeah, people has a suite, and that's, I mean, I talk to clients and I'm like, do you want to buy a place with this suite? They're like, maybe I'd buy it for like a family to come in, but like they're not a renter in because they hear the horror stories.
Yeah.
uh,
So
Very lucky, but it's
exact.
just
I
it's
mean,
given that
sells,
power.
but at the same time, um, to landlords, most of the problems can be avoided if you screen properly up front, right? If you
Exactly. Yeah.
do a credit check, if you did check a job reference, get pay stubs, and you actually call the references, you check the references if
Exactly.
they're legit to see if the
Yep.
employer acts, if they have a LinkedIn account that actually matches. Don't call that
Yep.
cell phone number because it could be a pretend number, right?
It
It
could be
could
a
be a
friend.
friend. Yeah, it
That's
could be a friend,
exactly.
right?
That's
So
just so funny when they give you the
exactly.
friends, and I'm like, why would I
No,
call your friend? I'm gonna call
no.
someone else.
Yeah, and if they gave you the employer's cell phone number, don't call the cell phone number. Call the
Yeah.
actual
Page.
company landline and ask for that employer.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
have to do the work to weed out the bad tenants. At
Yeah.
the same time, like, so you got to treat them like gold, so they'll treat your place like gold. Okay. Um, but anyway,
Let
it's
me
my
ask you
time to
this.
talk to
Give me,
landlords out there.
yeah, give me your horror story of what's your worst renter? What's the worst thing that's happened to you as a
A tenant who was young family, stayed at she was kind of work from home, and she had a young toddler stairs in a we had a for special we had a place in Chilliwack, Promontory Heights, and young family, and she was home and the toddler just pounded the ground. So we had a lot of turnover in the basement because we rented out the basement
sweet? Because yeah,
separately. We did try to insulate the ceiling of the basement, but it's not 100%, right? It's probably
yeah.
50% at best. So we had a lot of
Yeah.
turnover. Um,
But I mean, they didn't damage it. They didn't like
oh, they
that's
didn't
but horror
damage
story.
it. I did
Yeah.
have a horror story where it wasn't too bad, where one of the tenants, I did screen properly up front. Um,
Yeah.
the brought in his brother who had kind of a mental health issue and anger issues. So
Okay.
he kicked in one of the doors and damaged it. We gave a couple of warnings, and we actually did have to like, hey, you know what, to go after the third time. So
Yeah.
the did end up leaving, and it wasn't
Yeah.
too bad. He left a bunch of stuff, and he didn't end up cleaning, so we kept the deposit, and so we just ended up
Yeah.
replacing the door. So not too
Yeah.
bad.
That's
um
yeah. I mean, that's not bad. That's mine. Same thing. Worst thing is like a dish has been broken in the backyard, but
yeah.
it's doing that screening up front.
Yes, yes.
They just got some. We have some new renters in. We they knew that they were only here for 6 months. We actually just decreased the rent for them to
Mm,
stay. We
mm,
knew we offered it to them because they're such amazing renters,
yeah,
and they have to deal with noises. They have to
yeah,
deal with that up and down noise,
yeah.
and so we're like, you know what? We're more than happy to keep you here. And they didn't ask for a lower price, but there is a time and place to give someone a lower price to keep them in your house.
Mm. Yeah, so we other tenants in our basement, we actually didn't raise the rent this year because
Yeah.
he's been good. He brings out the garbage
Yeah.
bin like out to the sidewalk without us asking, right? So he's
Yeah.
amazing. Folks out there listening, 90 lords are good people. It's just the
Yeah.
bad,
It's
bulls that just ruin it for the rest of us, right? So,
That's the same for, and that's the same thing with the renters. There's the renters are so good, and there's and they're the loudest. They're most the boisterous, and it ruins it. And it makes, for one, it does make landlords scared. And I really try and tell people that are so scared. I'm like, you can do a better job of like vetting for this stuff. Like you don't have to be as scared as you are. But again, it's they hear all the news, they hear everything bad. Not going to rent their space. But like what you just said, giving that more control, maybe they would start renting it out.
back to this Argentina president um, country, and then
What's
Canada.
interest rate? What's interest rates there right now?
I have no clue, right?
100% or something.
Yeah, I have,
Yeah.
it goes to show that what we're doing is not working. So
Yeah.
I'm just throwing it out there. Politicians out there, look at this as an example. Rent control does not work. Now, I'm saying this, and all my renter friends, they're gonna just blast me on. So
Blast
I'm
you.
gonna be canceled. So we're gonna be done before we start. But I'm
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
considering this, just looking at all the facts out there. Um, what's happening right now is not working. So we got to think of something different. And rent control has proven not to work. So is any
Maybe
politician
we
bold enough
take.
to remove it?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Maybe we take some of those government employees and they manage. They have people that are there to manage the tenants. They're there
Yeah.
to manage the landlords. Better police it that way, because the system we have right now is just not good enough. And there's not, like, you can't even do a complaint or you're going to take a year.
Yeah.
We need to maybe allocate, and that's, I mean, as a landlord, I don't want to talk about unions here because I don't want to get, but I would put money, extra money aside to know that would this help, so that if I had complaints, if I had issues, it would be better, like sped up process.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think there's some changes that could happen.
To that landlord who was allowed a 23.5% increase. So back to the article, they were allowed 20.5% increase over 2 years on top of the regular
Of the
increase of
normal.
the
Yeah.
normal. So
Yeah.
those, I mean,
And
you know,
I think it still has to go through another, I think it has to go through another, I don't want to say it's still another tribunal review, but it's like, it's very close to it. And I mean, it sure is going to cause a
yeah,
cascade, sorry, if it does
yeah.
go through.
Like I was even kind of thinking about it ourselves. Like,
Yep.
should we apply for that for our tenant?
Yep.
But it's a little different story because our renter lives in our basement. If I'm taking to a tribunal,
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to live with him later, right? Like
Yeah,
whatever happens,
exactly.
this
That's, yeah.
relationship is gonna be strained no matter what, right?
Yeah.
Like just for a few $100s more, okay, maybe I don't want to
Yeah.
do that, right? And just for us and our family, my wife's like,
It's,
if he ever vacates, we just want it back for ourselves because my wife wants to build a karaoke room
yeah.
down in the basement.
And
So
that's, I mean, again, it's finding the happy medium. And that's where, if renters treat landlords nicely, the landlords are going to treat them nicely, and landlords treat renters nicely. People can treat each other better to make
yeah.
each other all want to work together.
So I mean, you hear it first, folks. We need to change the system here. The rental tenancy board. We need to have something that it's not so far into the tenant side. We need something more going for the landlords as well. Something more on the 50-50 side. Because right now it's almost like 90-10 in favor of the renters, right? And that's probably
Yeah.
one of the major reasons why a lot of landlords or owners are getting out selling. And what it does, it reduces supply. And when you have reduced supply, guess what? Rents go up. So
And that's where it's the price of it. Like it would be nice to get back to a spot where, like, people, like, the price of a home, like rent and mortgage payments, become equal again. Like I know in Vancouver, it's like the disparity is massive.
mhm.
Buy a place, say downtown Vancouver, it's going to be cheaper for you to rent it than own it. And that's where, like, the differences still aren't there. I know when I bought my first place, it was like, hey, this is actually cheaper or the same price as renting. I hope we can get back to that. We need more supply houses. We need that to happen. And we need to have better control landlords to want to bring more rentals out.
You have right now is just not working. Man, this just the rent part took up our whole episode. I think that's it for our time for today. You got anything else?
I don't want to. Yeah, we don't want to go into anything else. We already might be canceled. Like we said, we may not make it past this. If me and Alex don't make it back, you don't hear from us. It's a couple renters got hold of us.
It was fun while it lasted. 2 episodes. All right. On behalf of Alex Shanks, I'm Alex Pang. Thanks for listening to episode 2 of the Canadian Mortgage Show. We'll see you on the next episode.
Now, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, make sure to follow us. Please give us a 5-star rating. You can even send us an email because we want to know what you guys want to hear about. That's what we're here for. Reach out anytime.